Last call for anyone who wants to join the budget meeting.
Yeah, so this is when you want to.
And if you're in the sanctuary and you want to make sure that you can see the slides, some of them have a lot of detail in them. And we'll send out the presentation later on, but if you want to see it now, it's good to move close.
Come on down.
It's also good to move close on a Sunday morning when I'm preaching. So thanks for everyone who's here. You know, like much like I just said about communion, this isn't a requirement. This is for people who want to know a little bit more, who have some questions, who are looking for some information. And you know, this group of people, the Stewardship Ministry, puts in a lot of work, and they work for a long time.
No pay. No pay. No.
Wait, you don't get paid? But of course, they're not the only stewards of the church. This is something that we all do. We all have a part in taking care of this church, and it really is a partnership. You know, I was having a conversation earlier this week about ministries and committees and stuff, and they're really meant to be, you know, representatives of the congregation and doing the work of the congregation. We sort of charge each of these committees with different things. So this is a conversation. You know, this is really to give you some more information about what goes on behind the scenes, like I said, and for you to have an opportunity to dig in a little bit more.
Okay. Okay.
Who's starting?
Me.
I'm sorry, do I have to heal you first?
Yes, please.
That would be helpful.
Heal me first.
Yeah, stand up.
If only we'd give you an increase, Tom. Okay, so this is MCC Budget 101. Okay, what will we cover today? First, I want to introduce everybody in case there's people who don't know us. I'm Gail Wright. This is Patty Haupt. That's Brian Morrissey. That's George Connor. He's the assistant treasurer. And sitting back there trying to hide is Kathy Abraham,
Give us a wave.
who is our valiant treasurer.
Remember Bruce's joy.
And Bruce Johnson is here for this presentation as chair of personnel. So we're going to cover the annual budget timeline. We're going to cover the budget process. We're going to cover income and expenses, how we arrive at the numbers for income and expenses, not the numbers themselves. We're going to cover understanding compensation. It's really complicated. And please think about questions you have, but we are not going to take questions until we finish. And then we will answer every question under the sea. But you're going to have to wait for us to finish first. Okay. One of the things I want to remind everybody, and you'll hear this touched on again, is that the congregation we came up with these goals out of the ADAPT process, and the congregation voted to accept them as our goals. They are reaching today's generations, creating a mission that invites faithful stewardship of our resources. Those goals guided us this year when we created the budget, and you'll hear more about that later. Okay.
No, keep going.
Here's our,
It'll fly in.
oh, I see. So fancy. Okay, so from September to December, we basically have our eyes and our ears to the ground. We just pay attention to what's going on. We look at reports. We listen to people's needs and concerns and what's going on. Just listen. And January is when our formal listening period starts. We realized a few years ago that we needed a formal process to listen to the committees and be able to ask them questions, or ministries now, and also the staff. And so that's when we created our mid-year budget meeting, and that's the purpose of that. It's the formal process. But we also realized at that point that we needed to do a better job of linking up with personnel early. And so that's part of this January process that we go through. February, we start creating our budget. Yes.
Yep.
Switch hands.
Yep.
February, we first start with the big picture. We name the goals. In this year, it was particularly those ADAPT goals, but there are also often other goals that have emerged out of these conversations. And we create a theme for the budget. We get personnel recommendations sometime in February for staff compensation, and we begin evaluating those numbers and all the other numbers that we received, plus the needs, and we start really seriously considering revenue issues. March. At this point, we actually create a hope proposed budget. So this is the budget that reflects our hopes and our vision. Sometimes you have to scale back hopes and visions, but that's what we're doing in March. And Brian will explain in detail the process for that. April is our pledge drive. Now, we set an optimistic pledging deadline based on the timing of Easter and school vacation, and it is usually about the middle of April. And usually we don't achieve our pledge drive. So in the past few years, we've gotten about 60% of expected pledges have come in by the deadline. And then we spend hours calling, emailing, conversing, calling, email, and conversing to get the other people, get everybody else to pledge.
Still doing it.
And it is still going on. May.
May, huh?
May, we're done with April.
Yeah.
We're done. In May, we say, okay, this is it. Yes, there's still people that we haven't heard from, but this is the best we're going to do, I guess. And we say this is the amount of pledges that we've received. If we don't receive our pledge goal, we make adjustments to the budget in line with the overall budget goals set in February. And that's a kind of a back and forth task. We go to personnel, we go to other ministries, we go to staff to get guidance on how should we make adjustments. We also consider the newest revenue and expense numbers because sometimes things have changed since January, February, and March that affect the budget. Second Tuesday of May is the council meeting, and that is where we share the proposed budget for council feedback, and often we'll make some adjustments to the budget. But we then have to create a final proposed budget to hand out to the congregation, and it is voted on at the annual meeting. What people sometimes forget is that we vote on the expense side. One of our goals, one of our commitments is a balanced budget. So if we don't get the pledges in that we are hoping for, we have to cut expenses. And people will say to us, I'll send you a check sometime in the fall. That is wonderful. We always love it when people give to the church, but it doesn't help us predict what we can pay our staff. It doesn't help us predict what we can use, what we're going to have to plow and to do other building things. So that's the budget timeline It's a long one. We're all ready for June. Okay. I think you're next.
Okay.
Yep.
So a key part of this is the mid-year budget review, and we put that into effect a couple of years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago. But we have, the heads are, when they can't make it, different people from the different ministries that come in and talk about the budget, how we're doing to date, what it's going to look like by the end of the year, are they going to be above it or below it, and then understanding what the next year looks like. So we're trying to plan for the larger items, the capital items that we get into. You know, talking with Eddie, a lot of it is on the property side. Other things are more predictable, but on repairs and maintenance and capital repairs, those are the big things that come up. We've been good since COVID, which has helped us a great deal because expenses have come down significantly. The utility bills are still expensive, but it's changed the way, so, you know, trash removal, things like that, that have helped overall with expenses to make sure that we're in a surplus at the end of the year. And I think I've been here for 5-6 years on budget committee, and it's always been a balanced budget that we've passed, and it's been a surplus at the end of the year, except for this past year. There were some pledges that did not come in, and therefore we were slightly in the red. Now, that being said, there were 2 significant gifts that came in that more than made up for that. It was...
So 2 different things.
Well, it goes into savings.
But it's just,
Right.
when you look
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
total numbers and things like that, as of the health of the church and things like that, it's other things we look
Yeah.
into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's things that we can't control. You know, when people give us their promises, we said we passed that balanced budget. So that's what we go into, and that we cover everything. What's the youth gonna look like for next year? Do they need more money for this, less money for that? Everything there. Here, this is really what we get, you know, the top part, we can talk about from Bruce, who's an integral part of that with the salary history and benchmarking. He's been fantastic on what's going on with Tom's peers and things along those lines. Revenues, the co-op lease, you know, Jill, you've been a part of that to re-up the lease year after year to increase rentals. Where are we with that? Where are we with the old parsonage? What are the rents looking like? George, you're a huge part of that with Family Promise to get renters in. How are we doing for other revenues? How can we increase revenues? Obviously the shredding, the rummage sale, things like that, in trying to predict it. And we sandbag it and say it's lower, and they come in higher, which is a good thing. We're not overstretching ourselves to that. Although that doesn't help Tom. No, honestly.
Yeah.
I think that's,
I think that's it for that. Where are the funds? You know, Kathy in Georgia, the brains behind the operation of this, of where they're held. It's pretty conservative as we have it now in CDs and money market accounts. The markets are volatile. That's not what
That's
we
the
want to be. To make sure that we have slow growth of these accounts. So there are multiple different CDs that are rolling at certain time periods to make sure the money's safe there. And we can go into that in greater depth, but we have all the information there. And Patty just set up actually something where we interviewed an investment committee from the UCC just last week. So we're trying to build that and grow it to make sure that as we get these gifts in, we're investing them to the best of our abilities, still safely and conservatively. That's it for that. You know, we talked a lot about this, but it's things like, you know, hey, it's great when the steeple gets through, and all the other larger items that we look at with properties of the long-term health of the church. So those are the bigger items we think about.
seen and unseen.
Yeah, a lot unforeseen, but we have them mostly covered. Eddie's been great about the issues he has and what we're gonna have to fund for future years. So we're not pulling money out of accounts to put Band-Aids on things. Of course, sometimes we are, but we're aware of those things, and we can put those funds aside in the budget for properties, the same way that we're increasing the repairs fund, I think, by $10,000 this year.
That's our goal.
Yeah.
Because that's the goal within the proposed
The
whole
whole
budget,
budget.
because, let's face it, costs are going up.
I think that's it.
That's it. Sorry, I talked too much.
No.
No? No?
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about where our income comes from. And I allocated the percentages based on this year's HOPE budget. So for this upcoming budget year, our pledges represent 72% of the income that goes into our budget planning. Fundraising, which includes all the wonderful activities that go on here at the church, represents about 8% of that total. Rental income, which has really been, thank you, Jill, moving right along, represents about 19% of that total. And then we had some miscellaneous things like interests and other fundraisers that may come in. But you can see overwhelmingly the bulk of our revenue is from pledge income. We're very reliant on that. And that's what's really sustaining us at this point in time. Our expenses. I was amazed when I started listing all of the expenses we have to run this wonderful organization. Our biggest expense are our wonderful staff and their salaries and benefits. And Bruce is here to do a little deeper dive on that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. The utilities, trash removal, plowing, yada, 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 all the things we need to keep this place going, turn the lights on, heat. Repairs fund, we talked about already, which is an increasing area of concern. Ministry expenses, sabbatical fund, and faith exploration. So we have a number of different expenses. And faith in action, of course. Our general operating expenses, property and liability insurance, workers' comp, phone, conference, bank fees, proportional giving, and just the office expenses to print the bulletins and keep the place running. And then we want to know where the compensation numbers really come from. We're going to turn things over to Bruce. Do you want to control this, or do you want me to?
No.
You can just tell me when.
All right, I'll tell you when.
Yep.
Okay. I wanted to start here with do we have the staffing right? Because as Gail mentioned, lots of things change over the course of the year, and we see that with the staff too. Sometimes people leave for various reasons, and for example, the nursery attendant left in the middle of the year. We had to hire a new one, and we discovered actually in order to get one, we had to pay a little bit more than we were paying our other nursery attendant. It all fits into the budget, so we didn't exceed the budget in doing that, but that's something that we learned in the process. Also, program changes sometimes, and as you have learned or heard, both Rachel and Marcus are stepping aside, and a new person for running the youth program that is more arts, creativity based for the curriculum is being sought. And so that's a major program change, and this happens over the course of time, and it causes us to rethink about how to construct the compensation budgets. So how do we come up with the numbers of what to pay people when somebody's new here? Is we look at what the data is out there, and there is quite a bit of available data on what the marketplace will pay for somebody with a certain set of skills that we are looking for. We also look at what the church can afford. And if the two don't match up, then we have to figure out how to deal with that. And the UCC recommends that if you can't, in the case of a pastor, for example, if you can't pay what you should be paying to a pastor, then you shouldn't be hiring a full-time pastor, you should be hiring a part-time pastor so they can make up what they should be making doing something else. We don't thankfully have that condition here, but that's one of the things that can happen when you start looking at some of these numbers. Flip it. So how do we decide to change the compensation at the turn of the year? So the first thing that happens, it starts in January. There is a staff review, and it's run principally by the supervisors and the supervisory committees. You may have heard me in January invite anybody from the congregation to give reviews. We have a short process and a long process. Ultimately, that all flows into a recommendation, not only on their performance, but it also, we ask for, should we give them a merit increase in that process? Secondly, we look at cost of living. And cost of living varies all over the country. We look at it in our region here and come up with a number. And then we look back at the benchmarking information, particularly for the professional staff, to find out whether we're still on target or off target. In 2020, we discovered that Tom was significantly underpaid as to what he should have been paid for his peers, and over the time we've been increasing his pay, trying to get him to the correct level. We're almost there. If we can get enough pledges to meet the budget this year, we will have got him there. If we don't, we still have a little bit to go. So personnel kind of puts all that together and then writes a recommendation to the Stewardship Committee on what we think the total staff cost should be and how it should be spread out amongst the various staff members. So then so where are we?
Staff are in 3 categories.
The salary.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
My notes that went to turn into this look different than what they...
Abbreviated a little more, sorry. Trying to consolidate.
The first, there's enough space on each page, right? So instead of having bullets for this top line, it's in the line, okay.
Yeah.
So, let's see, 3 categories. Oh, okay. So, how do we pay our staff? The professional staff are paid on a salaried basis. The administrative staff are paid on an hourly basis. And the contractors vary. In the case of the organist or any of the other guest musicians, they're paid on what's called a gig basis, which is on a per Sunday basis, basically. The bell ringer is, we have, in all of these, everybody, but I should tell you, has a contract, clearly defining what they are supposed to do, and that is what enables us to do the annual reviews. The bell ringer, the bell director is paid on a monthly basis. And the nursery attendant is paid hourly. So it covers, it depends on what the specific situation has to be. So what is included in the staff compensation? Well, salary, and that includes a component for the Paid Family Medical Leave Act, which is as a employer of less than 25 people, we don't have to do that. But the church council opted to do that several years ago when it came out. It's pennies on the dollar in reality, but it's something which is nice for the staff. Then we have the employer's FICA contribution, which is 7.65% of their salary. Some of the professional staff get a professional development allowance. So that makes up the compensation for the staff in general. And they're line items that you see on the budget. The next one is we missed the pastor. So,
Oh, no,
No,
this
this
is
is the pastor.
This is the pastor
Oh.
one. Yeah.
Got glare.
It's, yeah. It's hard to see from the side.
Okay. The pastor is very complicated. And part of the reason for the complication is because in one respect, the pastor is considered an employee. In another respect, they're considered a independent contractor, self-employed individual. So that what we build the pastor's, all the pieces of the pastor's salary, but what we're really looking at is the total. And the pastor is allowed by law and by the church to kind of juggle the numbers around within that bottom line. But we build it based on, again, the benchmarking data and history to make sure that we're kind of getting to the right the right bottom line. There's a couple of things in here which are actually just calculations of the total of salary plus the value, the rental value of the parsonage. Already you can see a level of complication in there. It's the SICA is one of those things that's computed on that basis. The pension and the life insurance are also computed on that basis. So I could go dive deeper into this, but
I don't want to know.
Yeah, not really. It's total compensation.
So we're looking. So that makes up the total budgeted compensation. The second part of Tom's compensation is the fact that he lives in the parsonage. And so every year, it's not a cost to the church for him to do that, but it has a value, and the value has to be established every year, and it has to be, so it's determined by the church council. And it's determined, well, I spent some time looking at area comps and a whole bunch of other numbers and come up with a recommendation as to what it should be to be considered a fair rental value, and then discuss it at council and gets voted on. And that ultimately turns into something which Tom has to worry about for his income taxes. And then the last piece for the pastor is the utility payments on the parsonage, which we pay on his behalf. So I guess I've sort of jumped ahead, but we're going to hold for George. All right.
Yep.
So,
Well, George is here to answer questions, so
Do you want George to
I'll
talk
stop
about investments, or do you want to do
I think we'll
budget?
answer any questions.
Oh, okay, so we'll wait. George will just be answering questions. Okay.
So from a graphic, thank you, Bruce. From a
You-
graphics perspective. and
You
this-
need your
Oh,
microphone.
sorry. Yep.
Just from a graphic perspective, this was handed or sent out with the initial pledge based on the HOPE budget that we established for the year. And you can see that our staffing costs represent 56% of the overall proposed budget, a little bit more, 7% for new staff, 8% for repairs, 14% for utilities, and 15% for others. But I think graphically, even if you're sitting in the back row, you can see that our staffing represents a significant portion of the budget, as it should. So that was a very, very high level of all of the components that go into the budget making process. We think we try and engage as many people as possible within the organization to hear what their wants and needs are. But we have heard that there's questions, so we're here to answer them. And just maybe if you stand up when you ask your question so we can all hear it, that'd be great.
And we'll bring the mic. Do we have another? Well, we'll just bring it back.
We'll just share it.
Is there a second mic here?
There-
Tom's not here.
I can walk it around.
Oh,
Yeah,
you have a second, okay.
But I'm running the video. So
Brian can walk it
I can walk
around.
around.
This mic works.
Oh, yeah, you can't slide around. Come on.
Come on, Gail.
Do your
So,
part.
I mean, if anybody has any questions,
Yep.
Cheryl?
There's a, wait, Brian's bringing you the mic. Yeah,
Yes.
okay,
No, we need it for the people that are remote.
okay.
If someone makes a donation to the church and says, I want this $20,000 to be used for the music committee, and all of a sudden the steeple falls apart, do you take that money that was designated for the music committee to help?
It depends.
Okay.
Probably not.
I can answer the
Yeah.
question.
Right.
The answer is basically no, okay? If someone has donated money and they want to put it, there are like 30 or 40 different restricted funds that we have on the balance sheet. And we already have one in there for the music pastors fund. And if people have made contributions into that, that's where it goes. If the steeple falls down, and it's going to cost us $200,000 to fix it, first off, we'd have to see what other resources we have in the church balance sheet. Odds are we wouldn't have that. So then we would have to do a capital campaign, very quick capital campaign, to raise the money to fix the steeple. We would go into the gifts to the extent that we had it in the capital fund that's on the balance sheet. okay? I mean, we would use that first, but that's the only thing and if there's anything else there that is unrestricted, we would use that also.
Thank you.
Yeah. The other thing I just want to add, a lot of people always ask me, well, is it really important that they pledge? And I say, yeah, it's extremely important, because you have to consider that the budget is based upon what pledges we get in. And if we don't get enough pledges, we have to cut expenses, and cut expenses means staff expenses also. So if someone comes in August and say, well, gee, you know, I wanted to pledge last year, you know, and I wanted to pledge $30,000. I'm gonna say, well, that's great. She says, oh, you mean the budget will just be adjusted? I said, no, the budget is the budget. And it may affect next year, but it's not gonna affect this year. And that's the problem that we have. It's only the pledges we get in that determines what the budget is gonna be. And that's why it's incredibly important that everybody, if you're not gonna pledge, that's fine. But if you're gonna pledge, it's just so important that you get it in ahead of time.
Just a quick follow-up. We looked at, I forget if it was Brute, we looked at other UCC churches and how they do it. And do they pass balanced budgets, do they not? In the 3 that we examined, none of them passed a balanced budget.
No.
It was all deficit budgets. We're not going to do that. We're not going to change around and match that, because it's not sustainable. But just, it shows you how we look at it to make sure we have a balanced budget and how important those pledges are, because if we can't reach that whole budget, then we have to cut. And obviously we prefer not to.
Where do you start cutting?
Well, that's what we're gonna have to do in the next couple of weeks. I'd say probably in the next 10 days.
Yep.
Okay, we're gonna have to come up with a final pledge number, and then Kathy and I are gonna have to Kathy mostly come up with a balanced budget. And then stewardship is gonna have to sit down and say, okay, we're about $25,000 short. Okay, where is that gonna be cut? We're gonna have to sit down with Bruce and say, where can you cut in personnel? We're gonna have to sit down with Properties Committee. Are there ways that they can cut? We're gonna have to look at some of the programs. And because there have been questions, what happens, if a particular event that we have raises a lot more money? Well, that's all well and good, but the budget has already been set.
George, yeah, and then,
In the last 2 years, the personnel budget was substantially cut. So the personnel did not even get the cost of living increase for the last 2 years. They got substantial increases prior years, I will grant you that, which was terrific. But the last 2 years, the big cut went after personnel, because it's the biggest piece of the line item budget.
George, can I say one thing about revenue? This year, one of the things that we heard when we did our listening stuff was we heard some concerns about, on the revenue side, about fundraising. And we heard a variety of concerns about fundraising. One of the things we have started out with in the budget process, and that we told church council about, is we took the number that was our total predicted fundraising revenue for this budget year, and we just said, we're going to just stay with that. We're going to plug that into our new budget as our new predicted revenue for fundraising for this year. I will point out to you, I believe every single fundraiser that we have had so far has greatly exceeded its expected target, or its hoped for target on the revenue side for this year. We have not increased the predicted revenue for next year based on that. We could, but like with so many of these other adjustments, we would need to go back to the entities that are involved and chat with them a little bit. So it's a back and forth process. If we want to cut something from compensation, we got to talk to personnel and see where can we cut. If it's a case of making changes to the property stuff, the building stuff, we got to go back to the building people and people who know the building and say, well, could we cut this? So it is a lengthy process. And that's why we only do it once before the council meeting, because it's just too complicated. And I guess John had a question. John or Heidi? Oh, you're the, good for
He's the
you.
MC.
Took over you have
Yeah.
to push the thing all the way up, but then it wasn't working great.
Okay, I pushed it all the way up.
Yeah,
Good.
it's
Is it
working.
working now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Yep,
Just for clarification, is it on?
It
Yep.
doesn't work great, yeah.
When you're talking about cuts, you're not talking about cuts as compared to the current budget that we're in. You're referring to cutting the proposed increases for the coming year.
Right, the whole thing with,
You're not going below last year's budget necessarily.
It depends.
We're talking about
We could.
well, we could,
to cut the proposed increases in
Well, what we are working on right now is the proposed 2026 budget, which will kick in this July 1st and run through next June, okay? There's no change to this year's budget, okay? That would require another annual meeting.
right,
Because the budget was set a year ago.
right.
But it could go lower. Certainly it could go lower than it is this year. If we don't have the pledges, then we're gonna have to pass a balanced budget to reduce
You're
it.
adjusting the proposed budget as you have it right now.
Right,
I understand that.
yeah.
It could still go
So
below
Karen-
last year's number, though. There's
Yeah.
nothing that,
I'm not talking about changing last year.
yeah.
No, but it
But-
could,
So Karen, it's the hope budget, and then depending on the pledges, we have to modify it to come in line, and that's why we make that push for pledges that we often don't get, but we're trying to meet that hope budget, but then we're not gonna say, yeah, we'll find it somewhere. That's not our model. Give it a try. It should work now.
Is it working?
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And yes,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So yes, looking at the chart, and I happen to pick one up here, I assume the 7% new staff pie is because of the change from Marcus and Rachel. All right, so if you add them up, it's going to be 1% less
Yep.
next year.
Yep.
Yeah.
So is that, I guess I want to know how they're advertising to hire the new person and the salary.
We would take that, well, we figured out what we think the salary should be. And just, again, based on kind of input that I mentioned. When you take the Marcus salary and the Rachel salary out and add back this new salary and add back a line item for potential sexton, part-time sexton, the total is a little bit less than it was last year,
Thank you.
with the raises included.
So the only job that's been posted so far is the youth position, which just started going out this past week, and it's being advertised at $28,000, which is what's in the budget. One of the reasons that I think we felt comfortable doing, and I'm speaking basically just for me here, but why I felt comfortable doing that is some of the other positions that aren't being posted yet. There's still some sort of space there that, if we don't make the budget, we could get rid of social media person or, other hoped for things.
Somebody else has a question.
So correct me if I'm wrong. In past years, when the budget has come out, there have been 3 columns of numbers. There's been the first column was an anticipated budget for the year. The second column is the actual for when all of the numbers are, I know the budget doesn't close until the 30th, but that report is written well in advance of that, but to that date. And then the third column is another projected budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Last year's budget did not have that middle column, as far as I recollect. So there was an anticipated budget for the current fiscal year. What was missing was the actual budget for like the revenue. So nobody knew last year what the actual net was for the fair to date when the budget came out. And then there was the projected. So my question to all of you, this year, are we going to get back that middle column so that we have the 3 columns, the anticipated for the current fiscal year, the actual to date for that fiscal year, and then the projected for the new fiscal year?
George, can I handle this? Because we talked a little bit about this in council. When we put out comparisons for the annual meeting, the first column is the budget we voted in last year. The revenue is all, of course, predicted revenue. We don't lock anybody down on anything, but the expenses are what we voted in. The other side is the new budget that we are proposing to vote in for the new year. The tricky part is actuals. What's actually going on? Because we go on a quarterly basis. And so, for example, we had some conversation about actuals. Our actuals for right now are as of March 31st. They are really of no use to anybody. They're not helpful because a whole lot of stuff has happened since March. So the next quarter ends when? June.
After our meeting.
So guess what would be happening for the May meeting? We don't really have good actuals at that point. And it's not feasible for Kathy to come up with middle of May actuals. So, however, one of the things that we said in the past, that we said at council, people were concerned about fundraising. So we said, fine, we're just gonna show a lump sum total for expected fundraising. In our calculations, we sort of have a sense of, well, the fair usually raises about this, and the electronic recycling usually raises about that. But we won't show it anymore because it was starting to make people feel nervous. People said, well, this is putting pressure on me that I have to raise this amount of money. We don't look at it that way. We look at it as a total fundraising. We figure, 1 year the fair does so much better, and then the next year, but that same year, the recycling doesn't do as well. It all comes out in the wash. However, if we do that, nobody's going to see how much these fundraisers raised until they will never see unless we put out individual notices. So that's something we're open to. We don't care.
We're not trying to hide anything.
No, right.
But I think Sharon's question was, and I'm trying to figure out, when do you want that actual column put in there? Do you want it for what's coming out for the annual meeting in 2 weeks? Well, if you're doing that, then all we can give you is what was the actual for last year. I mean, there's no issue, no problem with that.
Yes, we
Have
can
that.
close of books.
Right,
We can do close of books for last year.
right. No.
No.
Fiscal
No,
24.
No,
Yeah, so
no,
it's a year and a half old.
right,
Right, so you can
Right.
see what actually was there for 24.
right,
Yeah.
yeah.
But what I'm concerned as to what was that middle column that you were talking about? That's why we took it out. Actual
Yeah.
to date.
Year to date.
Year to date.
For fiscal,
As of
fiscal
March.
25.
Well, I can't give you that unless I run a whole other budget, a whole other report showing what we've done so far this year. And doing that and trying to prepare the budget for annual meeting, it's just way too much work. I could put in what we've done up to the third quarter in March 31st. If you want to see those numbers, I can do that. But I can't give you a to-date number.
Doesn't tell you that.
It doesn't tell you
But
much.
that's fine.
Yeah.
If that's what they.
But it gives a
that's-
direction.
But it gives a direction, you can run percentages to figure, it's fine, you can do it.
I guess, yeah, I just wanted to just add one more thing on that. But yeah, I think what
That's what you want.
speaking just as an individual again, I don't know that it's helpful to see what budget was passed last year, or if it's more helpful to see the actuals from last year,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So
we
so
can
the
do the
actuals from last
actuals.
year, the actuals for third quarter, and then the proposed for this. Because I think that gives a lot of the information of where the numbers for the proposed budget came from. You know, so that we're not looking at whatever, you know, Tom,
Right.
we're offering Tom $600,000 this year, and we're not gonna point out how much he made last year.
Yeah,
Which fictitious budget are you looking at?
I'd like to say thank you guys for all of your work. I can only imagine the hours and hours that you spend doing all of these iterations of things, so thank you for that. I continue to have a concern that I've had for years, however, that the congregation has no visibility into these numbers until the 11th hour. And I did not hear today when the congregation will get to see the numbers. In the past, sometimes it's been 2 days before the annual meeting. I don't think that's appropriate. I understand the pledges come in and come in and come in or don't, but we have to have a deadline. And I think it's very important for the congregation, in my opinion, it would be ideal to have a meeting like this before the annual meeting where people that have interest could ask detailed questions. At the annual meeting, your interest is to get the budget approved. Your interest is not to have people asking line item by line item questions. And I think there really should be a forum for interested parties to sit with the budget. Maybe it's not even the final budget yet. You know, say this time frame next year. Say, here's where we are with things, ask your questions, provide feedback. There's no mechanism to provide feedback for the congregation. We can ask questions at the annual meeting, but there's no forum to really discuss things. So this has been a concern of mine for years and continues to be a
So
concern.
what would that, in your mind, what would that timing
give
look
her
like?
the mic.
Yeah.
So what would the timing be? I think well, like right now, two weeks, we're what, 2 weeks out from the annual meeting? You have 90% certainty of pledges in
No.
theory or
We don't,
expenses?
though.
We
No.
don't, that's
We're-
the issue.
No.
But you can't wait till the 11th hour. I mean, things can continue
So
to come in and
here's,
change. but-
here's the problem. If we were to go and create a budget right now, it would be the final proposed budget. And we would have to cut about $40,000 out of last year's budget. And there are people in this congregation who are very, very active and have pledged regularly, and we have still not heard from them. And what we would then have to do is we could create this budget that was gutted by, $30,000 to $40,000. A massive amount of work, mind you, because every time you make an adjustment to Tom's compensation,
Everything follows.
it's just a nightmare. It's take money out of all sorts of other places. And then that maybe we could explain, we could have a conversation about it, people could ask questions. That might actually get the attention of people who would be like, oh my goodness, oh, you really do need my pledge. Oh goodness gracious. If this thing is gonna be cut, this is important to me, I'm gonna pledge. And then Kathy would have to go and make yet another budget that reflected all those new pledges. And we love our treasurer, and it's a big job.
I think the challenge is just, and not to repeat it, it's just to
Pass a balanced budget when we know we have that versus still passing the hope and saying, okay, we're short 40,000, we think we can get 20 to 30,000 of it, and then propose something based on it might happen versus what we try to do. And again, it's, if everyone at the church said, go pass a hope budget, and we hope it comes in, that's just the big challenge that we run into. But
This is a question for both sides, but I don't mean it to be adversarial. What would it look like to have that conversation with the proposed budget at the start of the pledge drive? Right. So this is what we're proposing. What do you think?
That's where I was headed to. So I don't really have visibility, aside from emails that have come out, of this new staff person. I don't understand what they're going to be doing, and maybe I don't need to. I don't understand what a social media person's going to do. I've heard various rumors and ideas about what that is. What does that mean? So I think as a church, we might also garner a lot more interest in pledging more if people had an understanding of those staff positions, for example, or gee, our repairs budget for properties needs to go up by $20,000. Here's why. None of that is explained, and so I think it's hard to get people excited about increasing pledges without having a baseline education.
So you're saying do that at the very beginning, right? Okay.
before all
That's
of it, yeah,
fine.
I like that.
We could do that.
Yeah, we can do that.
And it's, I'll add one thing, and it's tough on our side too. Just,
there's certain things in the budget like the sexton, where I know I've been on the committee for 5-6 years, and we've been looking for a sexton. We're gonna say, okay, we're gonna pay this person $14,000-$15,000. But to put that in the budget when we haven't been able to find someone for an extended period of time is a challenge, because if we don't find that person over the year, that $14,000 to $15,000 is still locked to that. So when we pass that balanced budget, it has to come from somewhere. So does it come from Tom's salary, or does it come from somewhere else? So I just want to make you aware of some of the challenges that we also deal with on that personnel, where it's a wanna have and not a gotta have, but how do we structure that to make sure it's not taking away from the things we need? Does that make sense?
Kathy.
So I want to suggest this, and I haven't brought this up with stewardship, but it's just come up in what we've been discussing here today, is that the first Sunday that we come to you and say, this is how much we're asking for in pledges, rather than doing that from the pulpit during the service, that after the service we have a meeting like this. and we hand out the proposed budget, and people can see why we're asking for this much money. And maybe that will spur people on to pledge more, but also answer their questions about why we're doing these things. Because I totally agree with you, Jill. I don't think people have been made aware of the fact of why we need a social media person. Why do we need another person for the choir? Why do we need a sexton? And, you know, the whole congregation, the members of this church, keep this place running. And if they don't understand when the money's being spent, then they're not going to give. And I think we owe that to them as a ministry.
Yeah. No, we can do that. Yep, we can do that. That's doable.
I agree with all the people on this side. Because the budget has always been kind of a murky thing, and it's a fait accompli. When we come to annual meeting, we have nothing to say about it. I mean, we try, but it's already a done deal. So you need to get people in the congregation more invested, and maybe that's why you're not getting all your pledges, because they're not invested on how the process works and how they get involved earlier on.
That's easy.
There you go.
Yeah, but
Push it
we're
up.
doing the work
All the way up.
anyway, it's just presenting.
Sounds like we have our work cut out for us.
No,
Yes,
it's just
more.
going over it earlier.
Yeah, well-
That's the easy part. Like, that's,
Oh, does somebody
still
else
doesn't get
have a
us.
hand up? Okay. So having served on stewardship for several years ago, I understand what a complicated and exhausting process this is. So thank you for your service. Thank you for having this meeting. I reiterate what Jill and Kathy said. I think this is a first step in communicating, opening up some lines of communication. I truly appreciate it. I would so vote for having a series of these meetings, perhaps throughout the year, perhaps in January, after council gets together, council reps get together with stewardship and express their needs and aspirations for the coming year, and give updates of their status for the current budget year that we're operating in. That might be appropriate. I would add to the question, however, about it kind of seems as though the onus is on the congregation to get their pledges in on time, get our pledges in on time. I came in right under the wire, like hours before midnight, I think. There just has to be, we can't hold the congregation responsible for the lateness in getting the time involved in preparing the budget. Then we have to move up the deadline. If we know after many years of experience that people are not going to pledge on the deadline, or the second deadline, or the third deadline, or after the calls, then that behooves us as a council, as a stewardship ministry, and to do something different, because it's not working. Because every year for 10, 15 years, this is a repeating problem. So
We'd love a solution.
This is a snarky comment. But
Everyone's name, so we just check names.
Judy, you're still getting RSVPs for next week's auction? This congregation's not great at RSVPing. This congregation is not great at responding, like across the board. This isn't just a pledging thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's an MCC thing.
what do we do differently to address that?
So can I just say, I think George wants to say something. Can I just say one thing? Every year we do try to do things differently, and so we are more than happy to put this information in the hopper for the next budget cycle and see what could we create earlier on that we could go over in detail with the congregation. Exactly what that's gonna look like. that's to be determined, and we'll do more listening on that. I will say, we need to be thoughtful. There's Kathy, there's George, there's Brian, there's Patty, there's me. Often we will bring in some additional people for pledge drive stuff. But as you saw with the timeline, we are busy from January through May. So there's only, what we have to do is do targeted. We need to figure out targeted communication that is more effective than what we're doing. It's going to be hard to promise to add in lots and lots and lots of more communication, just because
People don't read.
people, some of this is what will people read, what will people show up for, but that can be discussed between now and next March. So.
I'd like to say something, I think, in terms of some of the things that we've just, even this morning, we're still finding things, and I've been on the Properties Committee since last September, that we ourselves of this group didn't know. And so someone looking at the properties line of why we have $14,000 extra for next year does not know that I have personally been here 2 days a week since September, cleaning, fixing, and gluing. Now, I will tell you, generations of Moors have not plumbed. This is nothing compared to the hours of people like Suzanne and Ed who've been living on beepers during the night when we're losing the furnaces, that the entire Properties Committee already is putting 60 or 70 hours a week combined into this building each week. And for people who just come on Sunday, you come and it looks great. Because we're doing it so it looks nice for you and God. But no one looks at that and they say, why would we need this? It looks fine. But, when we have rental turnovers and the amount of time Jill and people put in it, and I think other groups have that too, where there's quiet stuff happening all the time, and people may be looking at this going, well, why do we need that? And getting a forum open so people can discuss it, then you understand. Some of you have found me with the mop and the bucket, but you would have to be passing through on the days I'm here. And I've just taken 2 weeks off, and other people on my committee have gone through and covered what I've done. I'm back, but I think all groups have that, but the related groups don't know that's going on.
It also adds not the same people every year that are the late pledges.
Yeah.
Things change in their lives, health reasons, they're moving or whatever. One of our 10 or 15 biggest pledges for this year, or last year, still hasn't pledged. And they're always here. And I just sit there and say, it just doesn't make any sense.
Give us a number.
So, we're going to have to call, and find out what's going on. We don't know what's behind the issue, but at least we're down now to maybe 15 total people that are a little bit less. But in the last 24 hours, I've gotten 4 emails on pledges, apologizing, here's my pledge and stuff, so.
Just wondering when we will see the budget that we'll be voting on at the annual meeting.
Well, it's got to be, we have to present it to council, which is a week
On the
from next
13th.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
And at that point, we'll be sending something out, which is just 5-6 days before the annual meeting. We'll be mailing, at least now, we can email, and everybody on the list will get an email copy of the budget.
I was just going to say the same thing as George. We have to bring it to council before we give it to you, and council is late this year because it's the second Tuesday of the month. So we only have a few days to get everything together and get it out to you. I will do my best to get it emailed out to everybody by Thursday morning, but I have family issues and I never know when I'm called away. So all I can say is I can do my best.
And she does an amazing job.
And she's fabulous.
It's not a good answer.
Yeah,
but
right. Well, and we have to come up with the final budget. We still have to have it, we're all together here. We're all going to be getting together again sometime between now and Tuesday to come up to make final decisions on stuff. So That's, yeah.
And can I just say?
We really welcome any feedback you give us about doing this in
Better.
a more
Yeah.
efficient way. Listen, it's
Yeah.
a win-win. What I'd love to be able to, I want to say that I've had comments directed it to me as a not to me personally, but as a member of this, like, you stewardship people, blah, 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 blah. You have a tough job. I'd never want to do this. You stewardship people. We're all stewardship people. This is our church. We're stewards of our church. We're just here trying to facilitate this process for everyone. So I would just ask that you think of it in that way. You're stewards too.
Yeah.
All of you. And so if we can engage you next year during the pledge process to maybe put a little peer pressure on some of your neighbors to, you know, to stand up and say, everybody who's, I'm still talking.
Okay, I want to say something after you.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
Did I offend you? No.
No.
Yeah. So if we can engage our neighbors here at church and others who might not be here that often and say, this is important to me. Jill's like, I pledged. I got my pledge in the first week. I hope you're going to pledge too. Not leave it all up to us, but leave it all up to all of us to get this done. You know, we get a little pissy by the end of the year. I don't know how else to say that, but, you know, I have to nag my husband to go to the doctor. It feels like the same thing. And I don't want to be, I want to come to church and worship God and enjoy the time. I don't want to be nagging people or conducting business, much like you were just saying. We just want to get the job done. So anything you could do to help that process, and we're happy to do a whole big presentation with a bigger font on the Hope budget that we propose for next year so that we can have those discussions up front.
We are all the body of Christ. That might inspire some of us.
Yeah.
Probably not the people who are here. Not the people who need to hear it, but anyway.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for attending this morning.
Thank you. We're happy. This was, oh, yeah.